Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video on YouTube to help you improve your chess game. Today's video is about doing some critical analysis, and we're going to do it in the form of a puzzle. And I gave this puzzle to an expert level player last night at our chess club, and I'd like to kind of go over some of the things that he said and the order in which he said it and that kind of thing. But before we do that, you might want to do the puzzle yourself. So this puzzle is white to play, and the question of the puzzle is, which side would you rather have? White to play, which side would you rather have? All right, so if you'd like to pause the puzzle and take a while and try to figure it out, I'll give you a hint. It's not a trivially easy puzzle. That's why it's a good analytical puzzle. That's why an expert took a while on it. So you could pause the video and take a while and take a look at it. All right, now we'll assume that you've paused it if you wanted to, and at this point we'll go ahead. All right, so I gave him the puzzle. I said, which side would you rather have? So the expert said to me, all right, well, the first thing we want to look at is Queen H6, and it doesn't look like that works because he's got two knights that can check on G4, winning the queen, and then I'm not going to be able to mate him. And he's got those two connected passed pawns on A2 and B2. So he says, what can white do? So he looked around and he tried some various things. For instance, if he takes the knight on F2, queen takes F2, black can get a queen on B1. If black takes it and white takes back, black takes back and white now takes on E3, well, I think I played something like H5 here to stop Queen H6. And now black's just going to be up a rook. If white takes the pawn, black could even take the pawn over on E4. If there's a check, the king comes up. And black's up a rook, and he's threatening queen takes E5 check. If queen C7 to hold the pawn, then it's something like rook F8, and black's just winning. It's just up a rook. Okay, one of the things he didn't spend a lot of time on is what happens if he takes the knight. All right, so we didn't look too much at queen takes E3 to stop the two knight checks on G4 after queen H6. So there's two defenses that black has after queen E3. He could try H5 to keep the queen out of H6, or he can just try to get a queen and then check him around the board. So let's take a look at that. Let's say he gets the queen. And let's say, for the sake of argument, white takes the queen, black takes back, and now white tries to go queen H6. All right, so now the only move that black can play is queen H1 check, king G3, and now knight takes check. So clearly the king can't go to F4 because queen C1 check wins the queen. So he has to go to F3, G4, H4. Okay, but each one of those runs into some problems. In fact, let's have the computer show you. Right now, we'll bring in Stockfish. And Stockfish says that white's getting mated no matter where he goes. So let's try H1 in turn. If he goes king to H4, then queen E1 check. And if he moves the king or puts blocks with the pawn, then queen G3 is mate. So that doesn't work. All right, if he tries king to G4, then queen takes G2 check. Again, if he goes king F4, he has the skewer to win the queen. But if he goes king to H4, then queen G3 is mate. So that doesn't work. And finally, if he tries king F3, then queen D1 check. Now, if he goes to the diagonal, again, he loses the queen. But if the only other move he can play is to take the knight, and then black plays queen D3 check, king F4, queen D2 check, and he wins the queen again. So what does this show? Well, it shows that if white takes time to take here and black gets the queen, white's not mating him with... Let's say he doesn't take the queen and instead he plays queen H6 right away. Well, then we get exactly the same thing. Queen takes H1 check, king G3, knight check. And we have the exact same position as before, except black has an extra pawn on A2. So this doesn't work for white. All right, so he took a few minutes to look at that. And after that, he started to think, well, maybe black's better with his connected passed pawns. So he said to me, all right, Dan, well, if you were white here, since queen h6 doesn't work and taking a knight doesn't work, what would you play? And I said to him, oh, well, how about rook to d1? And, whoops, let's turn off the engine here. All right, so I said rook to d1. He says, well, now I see. You can't take the rook because then queen h6 and there's no double knight check on g4 and white will mate, so taking the rook is no good. So he said, well, can black play maybe h5 and stop the mate? And I said, check, king here, check. And he said, oh, I see. King takes h8, queen h6 is mate on the next move with queen g7. All right, so I said, what are you going to do on rook d1? So he starts looking around and he starts realizing, well, I can't move the king, I can't push the h-pawn, I can't take the rook. If I block the rook, he said maybe he could take the knight, but you really don't have to. You just play queen h6. And again, there's not two knights to check on g4 to win the queen. So that doesn't work. So blockading doesn't work. And of course, if you get a queen, then white just plays rook d8 check. He says, well, maybe is white just winning there? And I said, all right, let me play black. He said, okay. So I said, all right. So he played rook d1. He said, what you going to do, Dan? So I played knight on e to g4 check. So he said, well, what happens if I play king to g3? And I said, all right, well, now I can take the rook. And he said, oh, yeah, I can't play queen h6, but what if I just take off the knight and then threaten queen h6? And I said, well, then I have two queens I can get. I don't know if I can get a queen now. It's probably not correct, but I could just play h6 first. And then if you play something like queen to d2, now I can get a queen. And now when you check, I can play king up, and this should be good for black. Let's ask Stockfish. Stockfish says queen e7, rook g8, queen takes f7 check, king h8, queen e6. Black should play knight c3. That's a move I wouldn't find in a million years. And it says it's made an 8 from here for black. So black's winning. So after rook check, and I played knight g4 check, he said, all right, I guess I can't move the king. He says, I'll just take the knight then. I said, all right, I'll take back. He says, now I'll move the king. I said, okay, but now I can play h5. And if you play rook checks, I'll play king h7. And now rook takes followed by queen h6 is not possible because the guarded knight is guarding the pawn and I'm about to get some more queens. So he looked at this for a while and he said, that doesn't seem to work. He said, well, I don't see what white can do. I said, well, you want me to play white now? So he kind of laughed and said, sure, you play white. So I played rook here. And he said, which knight did you check with? I said, I think this one. I'm not sure it makes a difference. So I'm playing white. I took the knight. He took back, and I took again. And he said, well, I can play h5 now. And I said, all right, rook checks, king here, queen here. And he looked at this for a while, and he stared at the board. And he said, you're threatening rook takes, followed by queen f8. For instance, if black does nothing, then rook takes, king takes, queen d8, king here, queen here with unstoppable mate. So he looked at the board for a while and he said, well, how about if I play rook takes, queen takes. Oh, sorry, I got to take back that pawn move because black does have a move. All right, so after queen d1, he said, what happens if I just play rook takes, queen takes, and then try to run away with king to h6? And I immediately played queen d2 check. And he said, oh, you're gobbling up all the pawns. I said, yep. So he said, well, that's not good. So we went back and we tried it again. Rook to d1, knight check, pawn takes, knight takes, pawn here, rook checks, king here, queen here. And now he said, well, can I try maybe g6? And I played rook takes, king takes, sorry, g5, queen checks, king h7, queen here. And now, unfortunately, he's not getting away. For instance, pawn here, and queen g7 mate. Or if he plays king g6, queen g7 mate again. All right, so we try it again. Rook d1, knight check, pawn takes, knight takes, queen takes. He said, how about pawn to rook 3 instead? Pawn to h6. So rook checks, king here, queen here, and now he said, let's try g5 here. So I played rook takes, king takes, queen checks, king here. Then I played queen here, he played king g6. And I looked at it, I said, well, I could probably check and check, but why don't I just play a quiet move, g4, threatening queen g7 mate. That looks like it does it. So he stared at the board for a while and he said, yeah, h5 doesn't do any good. All right, this is mate. So he said, I don't see any defense. I said, all right, you want me to play black? So he laughed and he said, all right, this time you play black. Rook d1. I played check, he took. I played check, he took. I played there, he played there. I played there. He played queen d1. And I played b8 queen, b1 queen. Now, it turns out that it matters which pawn you queen. For instance, if you play a1 queen, and rook takes, king takes, queen check, king here, queen here, there's nothing that black can do. If he tries to sacrifice his queen, get another queen, king here, and resigns because queen g7 is coming up. All right, so why should it make any difference which pawn you queen? Well, it does. Rook to d1, knight on 3 to g4 check, h takes g, knight takes g4 check, queen takes g4, h5, rook d8 check, king h7, queen d1, rook takes, so here I played b1 queen, he played rook takes, I played king takes, he played queen checks, I played king h7, he played queen f6, and now I played queen h1 check. So he said, really? And he took the queen, and I played a1 queen check, and he played king h2, and I played queen e5 check. And while he was thinking about where he wanted to go here, I said, it doesn't matter where you go, I'm going to play queen takes f6. And I'm going to be like up 3 pawns in a queen and pawn endgame with a winning position for black. So he looked at it for a minute and he said, yeah, I guess so. So I said, but you don't have to take the queen. So we went back again. Try number 23. Rook d1. Knight e to g4 check. Pawn takes. Knight takes check. Queen takes, h5, rook d8 check, king h7, queen d1. By the way, all this is really forced after rook to d1. I don't know how much time you took when you paused the video if you did, but if you got this far, congratulations. Queen to d1, black now plays b1 queen. Only move, rook takes, king takes, queen checks, king h7, queen f8. So now we just saw that on queen h1, king takes h1, loses to pawn queen check, followed by queen takes e5, followed by queen takes f6. So white should now play king to g3. And now h4 check is probably not correct. Black should play queen e1 check. Now king to h2 loses to queen h4 check, king g1, a1 queen check, and that's mate already. So king h2 gets mated very quickly. So white can't do that. But where could he go to escape the checks? He's got to watch out. If he goes to the 4th rank, king to f4, he could actually get into mate here. Queen f2 check, king g5, queen g3 checkmate. So he can't do that. That leaves only f3 and h3. If he plays h3, black should just repeat the position and get a draw. If he plays f3, king f3, then black has a bunch of moves that would draw here. I think queen f1 draws. I think queen c3 check draws. I think queen d1 check draws. Is that true, Mr. Stockfish? Do they all draw? Yep. He's got all 3 safe checks here draw. And of course everything else loses. Alright. So what are we saying here? Well, what we're saying is if white plays rook d1 and both sides play perfectly, which is not easy, you've got to play check, check, queen takes, h5, rook checks, king here. You could take the rook first or play queen d1. I think it transposes. Queen d1, b1 queen, rook takes h8, king takes h8, queen check, king up, queen here, queen h1 check, king g3 only move, queen e1 check, and now either king h3 or king f3, and black gets a perpetual check. So when white plays rook d1, we looked at this for about 20-25 minutes, just like we're doing here in the video. We came to the conclusion, the correct conclusion, that rook to d1, the dangerous move, if black doesn't play perfectly, you win. But if black plays perfectly, there's a narrow and very difficult path for black to get a draw. So rook to d1 does not win the game. So then my expert friend said, okay, well, if rook d1 is only a draw, we saw all those other moves for white, which I tried before rook d1. You know, they all didn't work, so I guess if it's white to play, then white can get a draw with rook d1. And I said, all right, well, there's at least one more thing to consider. And he said, well, let me look at it for a couple minutes. And if you want, you can pause the video now and see if you can find anything else. But he took a couple minutes and he said, all right, show me. And I said, okay, I'm going to show you another move. How about queen to h6? He says, well, that's the first thing I looked at, but he's going to win the queen. I said, well, that's true. So one of the knights will check, the pawn has to take it, the other knight will check, and now white has 3 moves. King h3, king g3, and king g1. All right? So does it make a difference where he goes? Well, it turns out it does. Suppose he plays king to g3. Now if knight takes h6, of course not rook takes h6 because black just gets queens and white resigns. But instead, rook to d1 threatens mate. The problem is this doesn't work. With the king on g3, black plays knight checks. And when white takes, black moves his pawn, h-pawn up. And there's no mate, and he's going to get some queens. And black is going to win. So that doesn't work. Queen h6, knight checks, pawn takes, knight checks, king g3, no good. Similarly, king g1 to guard the queen doesn't make any sense either because after knight takes, you can't take, and he's getting queens with checks, so this doesn't make any sense. So after queen h6, knight checks, pawn takes, knight takes, king h3 is the move. Now if black checks with the knight, white simply moves the king up the board and then mates with the queen. So the only move here for black is to take the queen. And now white plays rook to d1, threatening a back rank mate. but there's no knight checks anymore. And the black king has only one legal move, and that's the f8, and that doesn't work because rook d8 is still mate. And the knight is helpless to stop the king. The rook's helpless to stop the king. The pawns are helpless to stop the king. So white is just winning here. So that's the right sequence. The right sequence is to sacrifice your queen and to get a mate. Now, if black didn't have the rook on the board, let's take that rook off the board. Let's see, I got to put on the examine palette. Let's do settings, board pieces, examine palette. I'm using Blitzen in the ICC. So let's take the rook off the board. Would it still work? Queen h6, knight check, pawn takes, knight takes, king h3, knight h3, rook d1. Black to play and win. Can you find the win here for black? Again, if you can't, you can pause the video. See if you can find the black win without the rook on the board. Black to play and win. There's actually a famous Grandmaster game where a Grandmaster was, I guess, was in a little time trouble. And he got to a position like this and he resigned. And after the game, everybody came rushing over and said, "Oh, you could have won. All you had to do was play umpty-ump." And this reminds me of that famous position. All right, so the answer to black to play and win is black should just play king h8. And if rook checks, of course, he can put the knight in the way, and now he's getting his queens, and black's winning. So the rook has to be on h8 in order for this to work. Let's put the rook back on h8. So queen h6 exclamation point, knight checks, pawn takes, knight takes, king h3 exclamation point, threatening queen g7 mate, knight takes h6, rook d1, and white wins. So what we've done in the video today is we've proven that rook to d1, if you do that first to try to deflect the knight so your queen can go up, if both sides play very cleverly correctly, black can hold the draw here. So rook d1 does not win the game. But doing it in the opposite order, where you sacrifice the queen first in order to get your rook to d1, that does work. This is a problem that I composed that took me a while. I had the right idea at start, but then it took me a while to make sure the right things were on the board, so that the computer was checking it for me and making sure that this all worked out. So this is a good bar bet puzzle to show your friends. You can show this position. Let's go back to the start again. You know, white to play, who's better? It's not at all clear. And usually what happens is if you know the ideas and your opponent does not, he's just doing it, seeing it for the first time, you could probably win with either side. You could tell your friend, white to play, take either side you want, and I will bet you that I can win from either side, and you probably can if you understand the ideas, and he doesn't, because it takes a lot of analysis to figure this out. It's a very good analytical problem, which is what we wanted to promise, and of course analysis is the #1 skill in chess, and the more you analyze like this and look at the possibilities, this is a good example of critical positions, lots of checks, captures, and threats. Okay, please tell your friends about my channel, Dan Heisman Chess. Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, you can hit the like button or subscribe, but we will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.